So yeah, welcome again, everybody. This is LAMAG's very first online exhibition. Once COVID-19 hit Los Angeles, we unfortunately had to close our gallery doors for public health, and the team really sat down and tried to be very thoughtful about how we could pivot online but still kind of provide what the gallery did, which was to foster these conversations and create a space for the artist community in Los Angeles. So we felt like a juried online exhibition would be the best way for us to do that during social distancing. So with that, I will pass it on to Brianna.
Thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, I'm just going to briefly introduce our concept here for the exhibition of archive machines. The juried show brought together, out of 300 artists, 44 were selected. These artists are all investigating the archive as a way to examine how materials are interpreted, appropriated, interrogated, especially during this time. We found this to be an important conversation as we are experiencing a halt in production as usual and have this time to look at the past in a critical way. So we invited the artists to do that. And the show's title, Archive Machines. A machine is meant to connote like a mechanism and the power of telling one's own story here. And so we invite you all to share in this. We've developed this exhibition out considering the timing of a living archive format. So we have 4 sections that'll be released at different times. So the exhibition's growing through all the way to the end of November. And these 4 sections are the arc. We've pinned them to action points of how to examine the archive in active ways through revisioning, resisting, rewiring, and with relating. And so very excited with this group of artists today representing the revisioning chapter. And yes, I would love to pass it off to the artists for them to share more about it.
Great, thank you, Brianna and Stephanie. So our first speaker is Lenard Smith. Lenard, are you ready?
I'm ready. How are you guys?
I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Brianna, and thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Jamie, for all your help along the way to getting here. Yeah, 3 of my works are in this show, and the first one is After Ye Must Be Born Again. The title comes from a Kanye West shirt and sweater that I've seen over the past year, and it's Ye Must Be Born Again. And I think it was, touching on like Kanye in the media, like all these things, bringing him into the media, like, is he born again Christian, or what is he doing, like hosting these like Sunday services? And so we can go to the next slide. I had like a stack of old editorial magazines that they've been on my bookshelf for over 2 years, and I decided that I was gonna cut them up and start to experiment with collage work. This photograph was made while I was doing an artist residency, a studio-based artist residency in Highland Park here in Los Angeles. It was hosted by Sarah Lawyer and Georgia Lassner. And it was an amazing just time to like bring a bunch of junk into a room, a small space, but very accessible to making lots of different work, where I was trying to play with painting and making these collage works. And then I had set up a photo studio where I was doing still life photographs And the still life photographs just expanded into making somewhat sculptural assemblage works. So this photograph of Kanye, I decided, like, while I was going through these magazines, I was just cutting out lots of images, mostly of representing Black and African American culture. So Kanye's face is so recognizable, I decided to try to cut it out as tight as possible. So it's just more of eyes and like a gaze at the viewer. And then for me, I have all these photographs of old relics. So I decided to bring in like a Polaroid camera that I can't use anymore. I can't find the film for it anymore. And just looking at that Polaroid is like every day, it's like, I wish I could use that camera. It takes such great pictures. And so this object, this invention, this machine, it's, for me, it's, you know, touches on some of the nostalgia in photography, some of the processes that aren't being used anymore. And for me, I keep these reminders around me. They're very close to me. And then we've got this ruler, which is out of place, and it kind of breaks the frame. So it kind of gives the composition some scale. And for me, I think looking at old, like, surrealist paintings of still life work, there's always an object or something that is just off. And so for me, like, this ruler has really no relationship to the camera, and the camera has no relationship to this thing that's on wood. It's a tree, like an orange picker, a fruit picker from a tree, which breaks the frame. So for me, I was trying to play with like organizing objects within a frame, and to do it where everything is almost resting on each other and has like some sort of connection, but there is really no connection in all of the things that are placed into this frame. And the Kanye image there is like, I feel like this picture, it was on the cover of a Surface magazine, is a pretty recognizable portrait. So anyone who comes across this would see that, oh, that's Kanye. And for me, like, it was my way of looking at Kanye being reborn again. And I just like to try to play with different objects and in a playful way, but I think the composition and what I include in the images have such a serious or a heavy tone to them that, like, there's some sort of balance there, but there's really like more of a tangible object that can be familiar to people. And yeah, I just try to like put things together that sit really nicely and they command like an attention span, because it's not just like I'm shooting product for, like, you know, a brand. This is something that I've decided that I was gonna put one thing here and put the other thing there. So yeah, that's that. I don't know. Let's go to the next slide, I guess. And this one is, his name is Kofi. And so my parents are both from Ghana, West Africa. And every child is born with a name that is the day of the week. And I was born on a Friday, and my name is Kofi. So we can go to the next image. And so this photograph, it's, you know, it's, for me, something that a little bit of a departure from just making traditional still lifes or even just putting those regular objects. I wanted to put things that are very relative to like my lifestyle. So I'm very much of an outdoors person, and I've got a big shell collection, and I collect rocks, and I have plants and different shrubs that I've collected on trail hikes. So that's where those rocks come from. And then the hair on top of this gold fabric is just hair from after one of my haircuts that I've collected, which I've got bags of, which I don't know what I'm going to be doing with, but it found their way in this picture. And just exploring different things to use as an object or a prop that could create some sort of almost painting in a way. For me, this hanger was just laying around, and it's, you know, just an object that probably just gets overlooked by me every single day, but I try to find some sort of use for it. And again, just putting that against this hair pick used to pick out my hair, I thought that was like something that would just look fine there. And I really liked the way the fabric just moved on its own. And I placed it over something and just moved it around until I got the right shapes. And it's a struggle. Some of these photographs, they take so much time, and then I feel exhausted after trying to get like the right feeling. But I try to have it feel that like everything is looked at and considered, and the way things rest and the way things balance on things. And some things are not as clearly, I guess what you would say, like you could notice exactly what it is, recognizable, but these images are all new for me, and I've been making these photographs now for about 2 years straight. So yeah, we could go to the next slide. And then the new movements, go to the next slide after that. So again, in this photograph, let's see, we got my Kodak disc camera. If my mom is watching, I sent her the link. This is the first camera they gave me when I was 7 years old. They stuck me on a TWA jumbo jet airplane to fly to England. That's where the rest of my family is. And I had this little camera in a camera pouch. So this camera is definitely over, I would say it's over 20 years old, closer to over 30 years old. And I've kept this camera. It does not work, cannot find the film again for this camera. But I have memories of taking pictures with this camera when I was 7 years old. Yeah, the Nelson Mandela book. Again, I find the book an interesting object. It's one of the main things that I own in my residence here. Looking around, I've got books everywhere. I liked that the book had a picture of Nelson Mandela. So again, there's like another portrait being taken of him. And the kente cloth pouch, something I got from my mother's house, which points back to Africa. For me, I guess I've had, you know, my own timeline of the kind of work I make that points to the African diaspora. So I'm thinking like here, like the things here in this picture are really important to me. And the whittled flowers is like, the beat up ball is like, for me, these things are, you know, the metaphor of like struggles and all the abuse that goes on in life. And we still go on, and they still last, and we still last until we don't last anymore. And the dice, I've seen dice a lot in pictures, and I just had some dice and I was looking for something else to put in this picture. And I was thinking the gamble of like being an artist, a visual artist, is you like sacrifice everything. You put everything in to like continue to do what you believe is something that, you know, is important to share with someone. um, or everyone. And I feel like no matter what, like trying to be a visual artist, trying to make things has been at the helm of like my existence. And I look back at all the different forks in the road that have tried to like pull me to do something else, and I keep going back to like working in the art making field. It's natural to me to want to make pictures. This photography was the first introduction into art making for me, and yeah, these pictures are very much a reflection of who I am, and I try to put different objects in these pictures that could be familiar to other people as well. So, yeah, that's those. I think that's the last one. And then I just had a last little slide here just to know what's on my mind right now. And I'm very thankful to be part of this group here.
Thank you so much, Leonard.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Danny.
Hi, everyone. Can we all see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Leonard. I wanted to start by briefly just thanking LAMAG and Jamie and the curators of the show for this wonderful opportunity. I think like Leonard was mentioning earlier, that it's great to be part of an exhibition like this at a very particular moment in our history where everything seems dark and dangerous. I think it was a nice island of excitement to be part of this show. And I'm excited to be part of this show here and speaking with Maura and with Lenard about our practice. So what I thought I'd do today is just walk you through a little bit of the origin of the three artworks that are included in the exhibition. So I have 2 GIF animations and a photograph that are part of the exhibition. So I'll just walk you through the origins of that so that it gives you a little bit of a context for the work. The first work that I'll start with is in 2015 I started doing research on Bob Dameron's The Address Book. And Bob Dameron's The Address Book was a book that was created in 1965 by Bob Dameron, who was a bar owner in San Francisco. And The Address Book was a secret travel book that allowed gay men mostly to find safe spaces to meet one another. So I started doing this work this research in 2015, where I was interested in finding evidence of my neighborhood's queer history. So at the time I was living in Silver Lake, and I was witnessing what I call heterogentrification, so the queer erasure of the neighborhood's gay identity. And I started doing research at the One Archives at USC, and I found the address books. So the address books were books that were created by Bob Dameron, where he listed gay bars, restaurants, eventually sex clubs, cruising spots. And he sold these secretly because it was in 1965, it was illegal. And if you were caught with one of these books, you would be arrested. So these were tiny little books that you would hide in your wallet, and they listed different addresses. He traveled all over the country, recording spaces where to meet, and then he would compile them in this book and sell them yearly. So this book generated 2 main bodies of work for me. So the first body of work that the address book inspired was a map-based project called Disguised Ruins. So this is like a website that has different maps inside of the website. And what I did for this project is I manually entered all of the addresses in the Los Angeles section and then animated the opening and closing of each space. So there's animations on the site that you can watch. Their data visualizations and mappings. And what I was interested in is taking that book, which I thought of as an archive, and animating the opening and closing so that I can visualize the rise and fall of these queer spaces in Los Angeles. So you see in 1965, there's very few of them. In 1970s, you sort of see the swelling of them that coincides with the rise of the gay rights movement. And then right sort of on cue in the early 80s and mid 80s, you see a drop in these spaces because of AIDS. So you sort of see the rise and fall of the gay rights movement through, so it's a narrative sort of told through these spaces. The other project that it inspired was an exhibition, solo exhibition that I had in 2016 at the Samuel Friedman Gallery, which was a series of paintings, abstract paintings, videos, photographs, and an artist book. And this was directly inspired by the address book. The paintings, I was thinking of them as sort of abstracted bathhouses. So they sort of reference architecture, but then they also kind of reference a mausoleum. So I was interested in collapsing these two spaces together, and thinking about a mausoleum almost as an archive as well. So thinking about the mausoleum as an archive of bodies and archive of spirits in a certain way. But relevant to the work in Archive Machines was this book that I created, which was, again, directly inspired by Bob Dameron's address book, where I combined photographs that I had taken myself, drawings. I used Google Street View and photographed every address in the first edition of the 1965 Bob Dameron's book. So every address in the Los Angeles section, I used Google Street View. I found what it looked like today and then photographed it and included those photographs in the book. I also included photographs that I had taken myself of the address books at One Archives, that I found at One Archives. So I was thinking about that book as sort of an archive that collapsed time and space in a lot of ways. So you had the past folded in with the present. And the owner of this book that was then donated to One Archives, whenever a bar would close or a sex club would close, the person would cross it out. And that gesture, that sort of marginalia, became really central to me, because it was a line of erasure. It was a line that signified a closure. And it was, I thought of it as sort of this echoing across time, because it was happening in the past, obviously when the person owned the book, but it's also, we were seeing it in the present, where we were seeing so many queer spaces close. Not just in Los Angeles, but in other parts of the country. So the other artwork that was part of this exhibition was this video animation where I borrowed that line, that sort of crossing out line, and I stacked images together of advertisements that were a part of the book, of the address book. And then I would erase the advertisements, and then it would reveal another line below it. So this became the inspiration then for the artwork that is in Archive Machines, where I took images of the address book, and this is the GIF animation that you can see in the exhibition, where I stacked the images of the address book, and I erased each address one by one. But because the images were stacked, it revealed a new address below it. So I was interested in that gesture as sort of reversing the line of erasure. So a line erases, but here I'm revealing a new address behind it. So it's sort of like an attempt to resist that erasure through that very act of erasing. And this was a video that was part of an exhibition in Seattle in 2018 that I then converted as a GIF animation for the exhibition. The other two artworks that are in the exhibition were also inspired by a book. This book is called Tea Room Trade by Laud Humphreys. He wrote it in 1965, 1967. I think it was published in the 1970s. He was a sociologist, and he infiltrated tea rooms, which are public restrooms that are known as sites for public sex, anonymous public sex among men. He infiltrated those spaces and started recording through written word and maps. He started recording the activity that he saw there. And he created this sort of ethnography of that activity. What I became really interested in is that, again, at USC's One Archives, they have a collection of his observation sheets. So these are sheets that he used after witnessing an event in one of these public restrooms. He would then try as much as he could to write a scientific observation of what he saw. And what interested me were the maps that he created. One of the kind of side tangents in my practice is this idea of mapping or counter mapping. So using maps to map either controversial or non-traditional data onto them. So I was really fascinated by these maps that he made, and so then I'm working right now actually on an animation that is based on all of the maps. So the following two artworks are artworks that I created for the Archive Machine exhibition, and that are based on the maps. They are titled, this one is titled Watch Queen 2020. So Watch Queen is one of the what Lord Humphreys found out through his observation is that the participants play different roles. And one of the roles is of the Watch Queen. And the Watch Queen is the person who observes and watches, but doesn't participate directly in the sex. And the Watch Queen is the one that usually watches out to make sure that cops aren't coming or alerts the other participants about someone coming in. So he himself played the role of the Watch Queen, and that's the way that he was able to sort of infiltrate the spaces without being caught. So what I did is I took the maps that he did, that he drew, and then using 3D software, I modeled the maps to look like ruins. And then photographed them so that they almost looked, I was inspired by a lot of photographs of Mayan ruins. So there's these satellite, if any of you want to take a look at this, there's these beautiful images of satellite images of Mayan ruins. So they're ruins in the jungle that are covered by jungle. And through these satellite images, they're able to find these ruins. And so I was inspired by those photographs. And I tried to mimic that style of imagery to create these ruins. The third and last artwork in the exhibition is again inspired by the maps that Lord Humphreys created. In this instance, I trained an artificial intelligence machine to learn the maps. So I trained it, I fed the artificial intelligence all of the maps that Lord Humphreys created. And the artificial intelligence tried to learn what those maps looked like. And this is a sort of glimpse of it trying to learn how to recreate the maps that it was trained on. And eventually what it would do is it would spit out its own attempt at recreating the maps that it was trained on. One of the things, and my main interest in Lord Humphreys' work, is that he thought that he was capturing and recording anonymous sex and the kind of roles that all these men played, and how it worked and the rules and all of that. But what I'm sort of arguing is that what he inadvertently captured is a form of queer mark making. And that's sort of what the animation that I'm working on right now centers on. So the idea of, I think of queer mark making as sort of ephemeral marks, marks that don't last, marks that are performed, marks that are invisible to those that aren't part of the cultural circle from which they emerge. And what I am sort of arguing is that what he captured in those maps are actually queer marks. I think of this GIF animation. As you can see, the artificial intelligence doesn't do a very good job of recreating the maps or generating its own versions of the maps. But what it does do, I think, is it creates these glitches, which I sort of think of as the marks. So it's visualizing these performative marks, these queer marks. I think of them as ghosts, as sort of these future ghosts that don't exist yet, for anonymous sex that doesn't exist, for public restrooms that don't exist. They're completely invented, they're fabricated. So they're these specters in the work, which I just kind of fell in love with what the artificial intelligence produced, because it so perfectly visualized this idea of ephemeral marks forming. And that's what I've got for you.
Great, thank you so much, Danny. And last but not least, we have Maura.
Unmute. Okay. I also want to reiterate that I'm just really happy to be included in this group, and it's really wonderful to see in the explanations how many connections there are between all of our work, which is really cool. So I'm also going to kind of show the history of what made my work so it's easier to understand. And I'm kind of right now circling back in time, trying to figure out what it was that made me start making art in the first place, like what it was that drew me to looking at images, especially in the context of there just being so many images now. So I was thinking about this game I used to play when I was a little kid. I had to spend a lot of time alone or, entertain myself. So I read a lot of catalogs, because we would just be in like the waiting room or on a plane, and there would just be this array of like golf catalogs or whatever. And this is Sky Mall. So anyone under 25 probably doesn't know what this is, but everyone else has probably seen it at some point. It sells just kind of sharper image style junk, kind of high prices on the airplane. So the rules of this game are that you are on a plane flight to your new life and identity. You can only bring what you're wearing, and you need to furnish your new life entirely from Sky Mall. So I would read it and try to pick out furniture and clothing and appliances that I had to live with from this catalog, understanding that they don't actually have any normal furniture or clothing or appliances. So it was the challenge of like kind of looking at things from a different perspective, or seeing them kind of like as an alien would and trying to repurpose them, or trying to imagine yourself living, wearing either of these pairs of unwearable sunglasses. Yeah, but I got a lot of pleasure out of this. So I'm trying to like go back to what is this feeling of enjoying, perusing, and looking. Many years pass, and obviously I became an adult person. And I, whatever, variety of careers, but I ended up working as a photo retoucher for a long time, and had to spend a lot of time inside images, like very up close, changing them to make them what people thought they should look like, as opposed to what they really looked like. And I became very disillusioned with image making, in that I felt that I was constructing images that were designed to make people feel that they were always lacking something, and that thing itself could never actually be achieved because it was artificial. And I also got kind of very into, at this time, Vipassana meditation, which I do at this moment think is a little bit culty, but they would say over and over, desire is the root of all misery. And I just kept thinking about how my entire profession was to create images of desire, and therefore I was creating misery.
So I decided to stop working for a little while and go to graduate school. And I also, had made some work around this. While I was still retouching, I made a body of work kind of like removing the retouch layers from the photographs and then stacking them, like automating them, so that I could take back my time and my energy from this work and make something visible that was supposed to be invisible. So all of this that goes on is meant to be completely unnoticeable, and I wanted to kind of foreground that. And when I was in graduate school, I kept trying to figure out how I can use these skills to make art that I would actually want to look at. And I was reading a lot about the Bauhaus and that the idea that like an artwork itself should be informed by the materiality, so that I wanted to try to make works that were very, very flat and very much about like the pixel itself, which is, made of light, like pure light. And so it's dimensionless, and I wanted to kind of compress time and space. So I had found this set of runway photos of a fashion show. It's just like also based on a job I used to do where I would crop runway photos and figured out a way to automate them into these enormous prints with like difference patterns. So it has the detail of like a painting, but actually doesn't take any time to make. So it's completely removing the labor aspect and thinking about this also as a painting. But honestly, looking at this now, it's sort of cool, but I also don't really like it. And that's because I don't really like digital art, even though that's what I make, because it just feels so cold to me, especially things that are kind of a coding based. Like the idea is maybe, at least in this, more interesting than the results. Or it sort of starts to look like the commercial prints and things like that. Like my sister-in-law gave me a pair of leggings that looked exactly like this print, and I was pretty upset. So the question for me is how to make something warm that feels connected to a person and connected to a specific history, even though it's mediated by a machine. So I wanted to go back to that original feeling of looking, getting pleasure through looking. And oops, I have to stop this show. There's a issue happening. 1 second. Sorry, I don't know why that happened, but I'm going to go back in. Okay. Ta-da. Okay. Can everyone see this? Yes? Okay. So I really enjoy shopping at this place called the Goodwill Outlet. I always call it the bins, but they sell everything that Goodwill doesn't want for whatever reason in these big bins that they wheel out. Everyone's waiting for it to come through. People just like dive in and rummage through it. And then this stuff, if it doesn't sell, either gets thrown away or shipped overseas, probably not the books and magazines though. And usually the things you find are pretty damaged. So I found 4 pages of a catalog that had the exact qualities, the pleasure in looking that I wanted to capture. And hello? I don't know what that was. So it had the qualities I wanted to, capture in my artwork, and it had this thing of looking like none of these objects really matter in and of themselves, or it's even kind of confusing as to what they are anymore. But these are the other 3 pages. But there's something really, really appealing about them. Like they're like visual Easter egg hunts. So I started trying to figure out how I could work with these images, and I scanned them in. And I was experimenting with like totally cleaning the surfaces, but leaving like visible clone stamping, replacing the things like these stereos with rocks, like with useless objects that I photographed, or the same, like cleaning the surface, but like leaving it really, really obvious that some work had been done to it, or on the other hand, expanding and flattening out and transforming and making unrecognizable what the things were. And so I keep thinking about like iconoclasm in these images, that I'm removing the power of the image, like removing that desire from the equation or the actual like objecthood that you might desire, and making it just about the surface of the image. Specifically in these kind of like voids where something once was, look to me like places where people keep shrines, you know, like in temples where the shrine has been destroyed, things like that. So yeah, I started to see these as remnants of a lost civilization, but it's the civilization of the 80s and 90s. It's like our civilization that's like finished, or whatever that time was, feels finished, and by kind of transforming and distancing these objects, they become like similarly like unrecognizable, ravaged by time things. So originally I, in graduate school, when I presented this work, I had scaled it really large because I was thinking about it as like this expanding flatness, or like going deep into the image the way I would when I was retouching. So I had made this huge flip book, which is the, you know, poster rack you used to see in music stores, and so you could have that feeling of perusing and flipping through with nothing actually having any kind of like greater value than anything else. And this is like including a bunch of other work as well. But then, you know, more and more time passed. I only had those 4 pages. I finally got an entire copy of this catalog, and kind of figured out what it is. I think it's related to something with a similar name called Consumers Distributing, which was this Canadian company that had warehouse stores where you would have this, the catalog would be on a podium, and you would look through it and fill out what you wanted on a little form, and then someone who worked there would go and get it out of the warehouse. So it's Amazon without the postal system, which kind of circled back to a lot of my other themes that I was interested in, which is like invisible labor in images and the image construction, and also the entire systems that are set up to bring people their objects of desire. Like you see the image, you get the thing, you see the image, you get the thing, but the desire itself is never actually sated, because it's the desire that you are connected to, or the thing that you want. So, you know, it appealed to me on a lot of levels. Plus, I just enjoy looking at it. So I started working on these pages using kind of similar methodology as before. But, you know, I want to make something that looks very earnest, but also be iconoclastic, and that draws you to it, but you can't entirely tell what it is of. And so I will clean the images, or I'll extend the goods. These are just 4 of other pages from the catalog so far. And these are the 2 that are in the show today, which I started by completely cleaning the surface and then slowly adding back in, just to give you the suggestion of what the objects were. And in this one, I like had them flatten out into space and kind of like take over the area. So it's this same kind of like painting procedure and repetition. But yeah, sorry for the technical difficulties there. But that is my explanation.
Great, thank you. Thank you to Lenard, Danny, and Maura. Really, really super. I mean, I'm personally really interested in hearing more about your specific works in the show and just the history and the genesis of them. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. We're going to open it up to questions now. If anyone has any questions, you can either put them in the chat and I will read them out as I see them, or if you would like to take yourself off mute and ask the artists yourselves, you're more than welcome to do that. Well, I have a few questions to kick things off. This is really for all three of you. How do you feel ideas about revisioning resonate throughout each of your works and for us at this particular moment in history?
Who's gonna go first?
Yeah, Leonard, you go first.
Okay. I mean, at this time, I think that I don't know if it's coincidental, but I've been exploring that topic of revisioning and revision through not just the still life work I've been making. I've been working on some new staged performative self-portrait photographs. And these also revision sort of a past that like I have never had any association with, but is on my mind all the time. And so I think that it's important to use these revisions and the historical context of what work we were making, but into relationship to this particular show. I think it's really interesting that the archive is the connection there. I guess for me, making work on this topic, you never really know completely what you're doing and until it's labeled or till it's genre put into like, okay, this work relates to the archive or this work relates to this. You might not know what you're really tapping into. And I think that the revisioning it's an important topic, I think. It's a little bit, it's a little bit like big, it's a bigger umbrella for as far as just talking about maybe archival processes. I don't know, does that make any sense?
I mean, I think for me, my interest in the exhibition was directly tied to the way that I think about making artwork. So for me, I think the illusion in my work is that my work is about the past, and that it's about things that came before. But I think of that as an illusion because I use the past to sort of register a dissatisfaction with the present. And that for me, that dissatisfaction with the present is an impetus to think about a different future. So it's the revisioning to me, the way that resonates, it's about how can we think about a different future? Like, how can we think about a different way of living? How can we think about a different way of relating with one another? How can we think about a different way of connecting with one another? And so the foil for that, for me, is to think about the past, and directly for me to go into archives is sort of like just a way, an entry point into that. So that was the way that I mean, the main reason why I was so excited about the exhibition.
Yeah, I guess I could be super literal in the word revisioning. Is that just because of what my work is that I don't take photographs, I just change them. So it is kind of literally revisioning there. But yeah, just to think about the fact that at this moment, because of all of this technology, the world is having a better chance to look at itself as a whole, you know, to actually see a whole picture at once. and then make according judgments and alterations based on that. Like there, even though there isn't really truth in images, there is like in a collective from like the many, many voices, a truth that can be heard, although like no one image is ever going to show like truth in any way. Yeah, I don't know, just free associating a little bit. But, yeah.
Another question I'm curious about. What, if anything, shifts have each of you experienced in terms of how you have approached your work and are approaching your work in this era of social distancing and just experiencing works now virtually and in this era of quarantining?
I guess I'll go first again. Just keep the order. Let's see. I've just been trying to, make work here at home. And then when I do go outside to walk my dog or to play with my dog or go to the beach, I'm going out really early in the morning to avoid the crowds. So for me, one of the things is, like thinking about when I'm gonna make the work and in what space I'm gonna make the work in my place, and what all of that entails is a lot of coordination, because like I've got 2 cats, a dog, a partner, and just trying to get like my own little space. That's one thing, but then trying to get my ideas together, that's another thing. So it's been a little tricky, but it's definitely, I feel like the home being quarantined can be my studio, and it could be that way for a long time. I just have to look into maybe changing a few things as far as the logistics of it all. But for me also, just taking photographs, especially like landscape works, it's a very like lonely process. It's just a tripod myself and going to where I'm trying to take photographs, so I can do that and get away with not seeing anybody. It's tricky though, because you'd like to have like studio visits and have people come visit you in person and see the space of how you make your work. But I think it's okay for now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the making hasn't necessarily, the process of making hasn't necessarily changed for me. But what I think, if we could think about it in terms of like a silver lining to the pandemic, is that I think it has opened up opportunities for artists that I think maybe in the past had a stigma. So like even just like an online exhibition, I think had to a certain degree a little bit of a stigma around it. And I think that because of the safer at home orders, we've had to sort of get rid of that. There's no other option. And because of that, I think that what I'm excited about is that it's opened up opportunities to make different types of work that maybe I as an artist wouldn't have made in the past. Especially because if we are viewing things online, then there's less, I don't know, I feel like the market thing, the whole thing about selling art objects becomes sort of less relevant to a certain degree, at least for me. I mean, not that I was ever very concerned with that, but it's not about an object that can then be sold. So I think that is sort of exciting, that there are opportunities to move into different types of image making or experiences online, even with like virtual reality, or there's just a lot I think that that artists are maybe either artists are exploring more or that other audiences are more willing to now experience as well. So.
Yeah, initially, I had a very hard time making work or doing anything because of this feeling of like extremely fractured thought, or feeling like that making art is maybe the most selfish thing to do in the world right now, and wanting to like do something, you know, just like this feeling I need to do something. But as this has progressed, it has become, I've realized, and that a lot of people I know have realized that that focusing on one thing and doing it is an action that is helpful. It's a calming action. Producing anything, is whatever it is okay. That we need to put less like global pressure on those kind of moments, and then kind of space everything out to like, this is the appropriate time for this action, and this is the time when I need to just like turn off my phone and not look at things. Because I've, you know, before this even happened, you're mostly experiencing art through your phone, you know, and thinking, oh, I want to go to this show or not. So everything you see is shrunk down and mediated, and it starts to be that art that looks good in that context is like what people go and see. And there's a lot of things that don't photograph well. So, you know, it's really eliminated certain kinds of work, and certain kinds of experiences. So everything is like a bit of a short attention span theater. So it is kind of a challenge to work within that, or you know, fight against that. Like, I don't know, for a period of time I was making work that was all clear and like just scratches on it, and like you couldn't take a picture of it, and it's like very perverse. But yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think we have a question in the chat that I think is a really great segue. The question is for all three of you, and it reads, the screen seems to play a role in all of your works, whether its role is big or small. How much of your decision-making, or at what point is your art-making practice, do each of you consider the screen? Is it important to you or not?
I'll go first. The screen, I mean, I think I don't think about the screen in and of itself a whole lot. With the exception of the Google Street View images that I shot, I think that was extremely important to me, because I was interested in this idea of like, and I mentioned it a little bit about these sort of echoes across time. And in that particular piece, I was interested in the way in which Bob Dameron, one of the things about the address books is that Bob Dameron would visit every single site himself before including it in the book. So in that piece, I was interested in the way in which he was going to a space, and then Google Street View was going to the same space, and then I was going to the same exact space that Google Street View was going to, and then you on your screen were then seeing exactly what I saw through Google Street View through Dameron. So it was these sort of echoes that happened across time, and the way that those echoes were experienced was through the screen, and that was very kind of important to me. So in that piece in particular, it does play a huge role.
Uh,
I can go, or you can go ahead. What?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, for me, the screen isn't as important as far as my process, but it has been like the only way really to be able to share my work. And it's something I do rely on in that respect. I think that to share my work, I can put my work into a PDF and send it to somebody, and they could quickly look at my work on a computer screen. And I don't take that for granted. Like, it's, for me, looking at pictures or things I I've photographed old scans or anything. Like, it doesn't really, for me, work for me so much. Like, I tend to rarely visit my website unless I'm making an update on something, but I'm not really focused on having my work viewed through the screen. So, but the importance of being able to share the work through the screen is, for me, like, vital for me to continue making work until I get to a place where galleries are open, I guess. We can actually like see a physical print. But the screen is a great tool for me to be able to share the work I've been making.
Yeah, I think of the screen itself as a tool for me as well, but not the end product. Even though everything I do is digital in its purest form, it's completely flat, exists in flatness and light. I do print things ultimately, like it's the ultimate goal is to be a physical object in some way. Although if I was showing someone images of this work, I would never photograph a photographic print and then send them a photo of that. Like, I would actually just send them this like JPEG file, you know, because I think it reads better. It reads closer to how it would in person. I mean, the colors would shift, but you know, because then it becomes a totally different thing. So it's almost like it exists in two different faces there.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to share a comment we got in the chat. A common theme here seems to be taking the very personal and making it public. And also interesting here is the value in something that others may not see value in, which I think is a really great observation. I have one last question, and then we'll wrap it up unless anyone else has a question they would like to ask. And I would just want to ask all three of you, what sort of questions or takeaways do you hope we as viewers and visitors to your works experience? And I guess if there's any, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So, I mean, I just want people to feel that same pleasure in looking that I feel. It's like very simple what I'm trying to convey. It's like a very childlike emotion. So it's easy for me to say that. And for me, like anything that's like radical about that is just kind of like refusing any deeper analysis of the image. Yeah.
For me, I'm really drawn to my viewers connecting to the pictorial influence in my work. And so, yeah, I just want to produce images that are, I guess, strong in their technical ability, but also what it is that I'm showing. So if it's a still life or a landscape or a portrait, that there is some genuine tone that feels not so contrived.
Yeah, I think for me, the main goal of a lot of the work that I do is that it's that there's a delayed curiosity, that the viewer thinks that they're looking at one thing and feels pretty certain that they know what they're looking at, but then either through prolonged viewing or thinking about it later, they realize that they were looking at something else. That kind of shape-shifting. I think so it's, I guess, more of a feeling or an experience rather than something concrete. And then obviously I do think, like I mentioned earlier, that I'm interested in a questioning of the now, and whether that is a personal or a social or a cultural questioning of where we are and what we're doing.
Great, thank you so much. That wraps up our program. Thank you so much to everyone who attended today's program, and again for your earlier patience. I want to give a special thank you to the Department on Disability, Richard Ray, and our CART service captioner, Beatrice Lucid, for providing today's services. And most of all, I really want to thank Brianna and Stephanie and the whole LAMAG team for putting together this. It's our first online only show, so we're really, really happy with it, and we're really proud of all the artists for your patience and for being a part of this show. And most of all, thank you to the artists. Lenard, Danny, Maura, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's really been a fantastic opportunity. And just a couple last minute plugs. Again, if you have not had the chance to see the show yet, the first section, Revisioning, is online now. The next section, Resisting, will go live next Thursday, and that will be followed by Rewiring on September 10th. And then the fourth and final section, Relating, will go live October 1st, and the show will close November 1st. So again, check it out. We have a lot of really great programming coming up. And we also have these fantastic educational prompts that our educator put together that are integrated with the exhibition. So check them out. Feel free to answer them. And with that, I will say goodbye to everyone. Thank you again so much, and take care. And if you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.